I had a client bring in a Mark Levinson number 26 preamp and the power supply, the PLS226 that goes with it. He'd lost the umbilical cord connecting the two and wanted a new one made. I did a little research. Apparently he's not alone. A lot of people have lost that cord. Mark Levinson had custom one-off connectors made, as well as with a lot of products. They had custom transformers, these connector fittings on the back. So the cable's long gone. The connectors to make the cables are long gone. Harman and Kardon now owns Mark Levinson and wants nothing to do with their old products. So it's a matter of trying to hunt one of these cables down on eBay or somewhere, which I doubt you're going to find. It's either going to be sold with the power supply or the preamplifier. Here's sort of a solution. And in looking online, the big concern that a lot of people had is that old connector is just sort of wedged between these stacked PC boards here. So how do you get to it? I'm going to describe what I did. This is not something for a beginner. If you don't have some electrical experience and soldering experience, I don't think you want to tackle this on your own. This is an expensive piece of equipment you don't want to accidentally ruin. But it seems as though the mechanics are the bigger question. So take this video into your local repair shop, and they could probably take care of it for you. I'm going to walk you through the steps I did. I'm not going to touch a whole lot on the electrical part of it. I'm assuming that anyone who's tackling this is going to have a good understanding of the electronics. And again, this is a guide. Double check everything that I'm telling you here. I'm not too familiar with Mark Levinson, but I know Threshold. Boy, they changed their designs quite a bit. I open up 3 amplifiers that are the same, and all the circuitry is a little different. So you're going to want to double check what I have to say here with what your preamplifier and power supply says. And again, I think this power supply works with a couple different preamps too. So the basics are going to be the same. This will give you sort of a guideline, and you can follow up with it. The information that I found that one colored set of wires was different. Of course, you might find quite a bit more. So anyway, let's take a look at the power supply first, and you're going to notice this power supply has a lot more issues than just the cable. That's not the right transformer in it, but that's something else. All right, you've got a bunch of these connectors, which I've removed. These are your outputs. Right here you've got the cable itself has 9 wires, 8 connectors, and then it's got a ground. And I've got a little drawing here. I'm gonna show you what all those connectors are for. You can see them there. Okay, there we go. Those are the connectors, and this is a dual monaural design. So we've got a power supply for left channel, right channel, and then we also have a third power supply for the relays. And how this particular unit works is it has relays that will switch between your sources. Instead of having a switch with wires running to it that switch between your auxiliary or CD player, whatever the sources are in here, they control relays back here. And I guess the idea is less wire, the switching is closer to the PC boards. But anyway, that's what the third power supply is for. So let's take a look at this. Relay power supply are the top 2. We've got a plus 24 volts DC, 0 volts DC. These 3 on this side, negative 33, 0, positive 33. That's for one channel. The other side over here, negative 33 volts DC, 0, positive 33 volts DC. That is for the other channel. I believe this is an unregulated supply, so it may vary. I think I was getting about 31 to 35 is probably fine. These are the 8 connections, and then in here You got the brown, which goes to the ground. Brown to the ground. All right, let's come over here. Take a look at the preamp. And what you're going to see, this sort of gold wire, shielded wire here. And coming out of it, we've got 3 wires here, 3 wires here. And there's a pair underneath here. Can't see them. It's a black and a yellow. So let's start with this. Again, this is to one channel. That's to the other channel. 0 volts DC is the green. Negative 33 volts DC, the black. Positive 33 volts DC is the red. That's for one channel. And this is for the other channel. Corresponds with what we saw right over here. One channel and the other channel. Now let's talk about these two over here. I'm going to come over here, and I don't know if you can see it, but you will when you get into this. You can see if I can get this in here. If you can see, there's one connector and the other. Black and yellow. You're not going to be able to get those out. And the black is a negative 24 volt, or 0 volts DC, and the yellow is the positive 24 volts DC for the relay power supply. So you're going to need to make very careful reference of the old connector, what wires go where, and where they end up over here. I'll leave that to you guys. I did my own little drawing and made up my own cable. And went from there. Let's see, I've got a little cheat sheet here. So let's talk a bit about, let's get the connector that I made here. The cable. That's the cable I made there. Again, 9 conductors and a ground, and I'm going to give you the part numbers. I'm going to zoom in on all this. This is from Mauser, and those are the parts that make up the cable and the connectors on the back of the 2 units. These are multiple parts for that connector, same at either end. And then we've got 2 connectors which go on the back of the units. They're both identical. We have one back of the preamp, other on the back of the power supply. And that is what you need to do this conversion. At the top here, I've got the 2 types of wire that you could use, shielded and unshielded. Mark Levinson originally used to shielded, from what I can tell. I never had the cable. Considerably more expensive. My client wanted to go with the unshielded, which I think is fine. I don't know if you necessarily need shielded for that. Shield is going to be a little more difficult to work with because you're going to need to get that shield into one of the connectors. I had enough hard time just dealing with the wire itself. But anyway, you want to give the shielded a try, tell me how it goes. To me, this was probably the most challenging part, was assembling this cable, and I did that first after I traced all of the wires, where they're all going and where I wanted them to go, and what pins from the old socket matched up with the new ones. And again, if you don't get all this, send me a message, I'll send it to you. I'm going to share with you a couple of other things which you can find on the internet. You probably found it already, but I'll be happy to send you copies of it. This is the schematic of the power supply, which comes in handy. Again, double check everything. All right, it's upside down, as I found. One color was incorrect. Apparently whoever put the schematic together had 2 purple wires on their setup. Mine has a gray instead of a purple. This is another one you can find online, and these are a big help. This is the configuration of the socket. This is a third one, and these are all my sort of cheat sheet and notes on it that I used for converting from one connector, the stock connector, to the one I have. And this is just my own picture and notes while I was doing it. What I ended up doing, I just used 2 clamps. Clamp them to my workbench, put the connector in one, put the cable in the other. And then I have a nice magnifying light because my eyes are getting old and don't work very well. And I soldered everything together. What worked for me is I stripped 9/16 of an inch off the end of the sheathing, took sheathing off the end of the wire, and then I stripped the cables about 1/8 of an inch. And that gave me just enough to insert in the tiny little pins on these and carefully soldered them. Now, I'm going to show you, if you take a look at the back, Mark Levinson had a heat shrink. And I reused them all for the connectors on the power supply and the preamp. I had some shrink tubing that I tried to put on this. I just could not get it on. I needed to strip, I couldn't strip the cable, the sheathing back any more than 9/16 because then it wouldn't grab the clamp there. And that just didn't give me enough room to put the heat shrink tubing on and then solder it and then slide it back down over. It all seemed pretty solid when I was all finished. It didn't seem like anything would connect unless somebody really damaged the connector, in which case I think it'd fail anyway. But give it a shot. You may be better at this than me, and you slip the heat shrink on. Let's take a look now. Connectors, cables. All right, so this one is pretty straightforward in the power supply. You can see we've got 2 connectors on there. I just replaced one. We left the original one in there. Remove all these. Cut the nut ties off. You'll undo the nut from the back. Feed that nut all the way through. Take the old connector out. And at that point, I was able to have everything pretty much loose enough that I could use my clamps and other little, cheater holders that I could solder the new one on. Now, the new connector, the old connector feeds to the front. The new connector feeds through the back. And you can remove this entire back panel if it makes it easier, just by removing the power in connections. And the whole thing will come out, and you can plop it down on your table and put it together. Just make sure that you pay attention that you don't solder something that you can't put this back together again. As I mentioned, this feeds to the back, that feeds to the front. This is relatively easy, and the soldering is a little tricky and a pain in the butt, but that's kind of the easy part of it. Let's see. All right, so let's get to the preamp. One you've been waiting for. Okay, that's the issue. That connector is just sandwiched between these 2 boards, and not only is there connectors going from one board to the other, I think some of the supports actually transfer electricity from one board to the other. So we're going to come around to the back here. And you're going to take all the screws off. I've taken the top and the bottom off of this. You'll figure out how to take it apart. And you're going to want to, these 2 wires here, right here, go to the XLR connectors here. You're going to want to unsolder these. Give you enough slack to pull this further away. We're going to come over to this side here. Again, XLR connectors. We've got a bunch of wires from the XLR connectors that actually, I'm going to spin this around. Wrap around that support. Let me clean it out. That support right there. They wrap around on the outside of it. This prevents me from pulling the back cover off enough to do the work I need to do. So what I did is I undid the screw on the top. There's a screw on the bottom, so I need to take the bottom off. You can carefully sorry, you can carefully pull this post out, push these wires, the XLR wires, to the inside, and then you can reinstall the post. And this gives you enough room that you can now, sorry, take this back panel, pull it off enough, and flop it down. First thing you're going to want to do is disconnect the connector on the back. And let's, sorry I didn't take pictures while I was doing this, because quite honestly I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pull it off. So I'm working off of notes here. Let's see what's next. All right, what we want to do is we're going to remove the entire connector. So you've got the old style plug, which you're going to remove the nut from the back, and you're going to pull the whole unit through the front. And what you're going to do is you're going to remove the 3 connectors here that powers left channel or right channel, I'm sure. These 3 right here, which power the other channel. And then what you're going to find is a black and the yellow wire and a ground. The ground just goes right over to here, and you can unsolder it if you want, or cut it. Well, probably unsolder, it's easy enough. But the black and the yellow wires you're going to need to cut, and you're going to need to cut them close enough to the old connector that when you reinstall this, you can solder to those 2 wires. In addition, you've got 2 ground wires that are part of the sheathing of this cable, and I think, yeah, the other cable that's in there, the black and the yellow cable. Those are 2 ground cables connected to the sheathing in here that go from the sheathing and again connect to the ground on the PC boards there. Those 2 wires you're going to need to cut also. They have nothing to do with the connector, but they're part of the sheathing on this, and we want to take this entire contraption out. There's this whole rigid wire here connected to the terminal. You're going to want to pull it all the way through, and it will have the black and the yellow wire, which are the 24-volt relay power supply, and then it's got the 2 grounds from the shield of these cables that go back and actually connect to the PC board in there. Once you have that entire contraption out, you can again put it in the 2 clamps, take it all and take it apart from the old connector, and then solder it up to the new connector. And that will then, you'll need to actually, once you have it together, what you will do is you'll just carefully feed it back through, solder up those wires that you cut, fit the panel back over it, and put the screw on it. Now, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. A couple things I want to point out. Be very careful when you're pulling the back panel off. We have bushings that are on all of these. What are they? I can't even remember the name of the fittings. But just pay attention to those. They're going to need to go back on when you, if they fall off, you're going to need to put it back on. Now, the other thing I want to point out is the connectors, the hole for the connector needs to be bigger than the existing hole. And what I just used is drill with a reaming tool on it. Just ream it out. Doesn't need to go too much larger. It's pretty easy to do on the rear panel because, if you remember, we had that entire panel off anyway, and you can take it out of the shop, put in a clamp. This was a little trickier. Once you get the connector out, like I talked about, this panel will come out pretty far and hang down. You've got the slack in the wires over here. You can pull them pretty far out, and now you've picked up some more slack on the XLRs over here. So you've got a fair amount of wire in there to get this back far enough that you can hold the panel in your hand and carefully bore that out. My background is construction, so I've got a little more experience in holding something and drilling at the same time. Probably not very smart. I put a rag over the preamplifier just to make sure none of the aluminum bits got into it, and just went at it carefully and used the fitting. Actually, before I put all this together is when I did the boring, because I wanted to be able to take that fitting and fit it into the hole. And it doesn't take very long. The hole doesn't need to be that much bigger, but it does need to be bored out. All right, so you've got your preamp done. You've made your cable. and you've got that together. What I did is I connected my cable to the preamp, I connected my cable to this fitting, and before feeding to the amplifier, the preamplifier, I tested everything. I just made sure that I did not make a mistake in crossing up my wires in here. And while it was loose sitting on the table, I tested for my, as we talked about earlier, our negative 33, positive 33, negative 33, positive 33, and then my 24. Made sure I got my polarities correct, very important. And I tested these all with a load. I think I put a 1K or 2K resistor on it. I was having problems getting accurate readings. Without that, you may have a VOM that actually puts a load on it. But anyway, I put a load on, tested, made sure that I had everything correct before I hooked up the amplifier, just like we talked about before. It's sort of a double check to make sure somewhere between this, the new connector, the cable at both ends, the connector here, and all the wires, you did not make a mistake. It's 9 wires, and there's that possibility. Anyway, you tested it all. It's working fine. Now what we're doing is we're going back to what we talked about earlier. You're taking that unit, which is all of this wire here. It's a rigid wire. It doesn't bend or flop around. And how it is now soldered to the new connector. And you are, well, the back is folded down. You're feeding it through. You can make these connections here. This cover is going to come down far enough that you got plenty of access to solder those, what was it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wires in there. You've got the black and the yellow, which you cut from the pins in there, solder and heat shrink tubing if you'd like. You've got the 2 grounds from the sheathing, which actually go to the same point on the PC board, so you could probably connect those all together, just solder them up in a little heat shrink tubing. And then you've got the ground, which is your shield that is going to just come right over here, and you can just resolder it onto the lug on the back there. And then you turn it all on and keep your fingers crossed. Let's see, was there anything else in here? Install. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. Any of those paperwork that I showed you earlier, if you can't find them on the net, drop me a message and I'll PDF them and send them over to you. And again, I think that's it. Good luck. All right, rewatching the first video, I realized I left something out. We talked about this connector and how it's going to be connected to this rigid wire here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wires in here, which is connecting up to the new connector on the back. It's 9 terminals on the back. I forgot to mention how I did the ground and the black and the yellow for the 24-volt supply to the relays. While I had the connector out and I was soldering up these leads here, I just took a short piece of black wire, short piece of yellow wire, and a short piece of, God, I think the ground was green on this side, and just soldered them up to the back of the terminal. So before I slid this in, we talked about how we're going to need to solder up connections in there. So now you've got the black and the yellow, which you can solder up to the 24-volt leads, which we cut, which go underneath here. And then the ground lead, I just left it long enough to run, all the way over here, and soldered it up there and got rid of the original ground lead altogether. And then, of course, we talked about the 2 green leads, which come out of this wire that basically just come to here and then loop around underneath there and attached to the PC board. Has nothing to do with the connector, really, but it is attached to this, and when we take the whole thing out to work on it, we do need to cut those. So that is how I dealt with the black and the yellow, which are underneath here, and you can't get those out. You can try, but it looked as though I might be able to get them out, but I'm pretty sure I could never get them back in. So that was the solution there. Just solder on some short leads of wire to the connector before you put it all back together. The black and the yellow for the 24-volt power supply for the relays, and then just a new ground, which you will loop around in there, solder there. All right, thank you.